Isn't that a great picture? I saw that picture and I was like, that has to be in my slideshow. Good morning, everyone. When you go to a superhero movie, do you expect there to be action? Typically, right? You wouldn't go to an actionless movie, right? If it was described that way, that would sound boring. Typically, when you go see a movie like Batman, something you don't see is a lack of action. In my opinion, the Dark Knight trilogy is the best superhero trilogy out there, and there's plenty of action in it. Batman sets a bat signal on top of the police station so that he can be called at any time at night that he's needed. So imagine if Batman just stopped showing up. What's the point of the bat signal? Okay? Or imagine if the world is in danger and the Avengers are needed and they call the president and say, sorry, we can't show up because we're on vacation. Well, with superheroes, there seems to be an unwritten expectation that they will show up when they're needed. And since they are super, then there's an expectation that they would also try their best, right? Though we won't be talking about superheroes today in the Bible, there is an important lesson to be learned about being ready to act and doing our best when the opportunity presents itself. So we'll be in Genesis chapter 24, and in this chapter we find Abraham as an old man. Now, since the appearance of Abraham in the Bible, he was what we would classify as old. This is ancient by our standards, okay? Like over 130 years old, okay? At this point in his life, his wife Sarah has passed away, and Isaac has grown up to the point of needing to be married. So Abraham is too old to travel, and so he needs someone to do the traveling and the wife selecting for him. So he calls upon his servant. So Genesis 24, starting in verse 1, it says, Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, there's a theme here, okay, who was in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham said to him, See to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, To your offspring I will give you this land. You will send his angel before me, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. There are some important lessons to take from this scripture. There are also some things that are culturally odd to us in this section. First, let's go with it's important to surround yourself with people you can trust. As previously stated, Abraham is old and cannot travel, but his son needs a wife, and Abraham specifically wants her to be a relative. So someone needs to go and do the choosing and the traveling in order to make that happen. They don't have email. You can't send a text message and see about arranging a wife long distance that way. So someone actually has to travel. Enter Abraham's servant. Jewish tradition calls him Eleazar, though it's not spelled out here in the text. We'll just refer to him as the servant. Abraham commands him to travel back to the land of his ancestors to select a wife for Isaac. Now, realize this. First, arranged marriage was popular until the first half of the 20th century. Choosing your wife without the help of your family or your husband is relatively new. And so it's also still popular in some cultures of the world today. Second, though marrying a relative sounds weird to us, it was not uncommon back then. We can't pinpoint why Abraham makes this commandment to go back to his relatives. Both the Canaanites and Abraham's relatives are both polytheistic. Remember that Abraham was originally from Ur of the Chaldeans, which is in the bottom right corner of this map. And his family then immigrated to Haran, and then Abraham went to Canaan from there. So maybe he wants to literally keep God's covenant in the family, but maybe it was because of the stark difference between the polytheism of the Canaanites and the polytheism of Abraham's family. The big difference was that the Canaanites' rain and fertility idols had a large level of sexual promiscuity in their worship, whereas Abraham's polytheistic background did not. Obviously, that would affect a marriage. Regardless, the oath is sworn by the servant placing his hand under the thigh of his master. This symbolizes a bond to the commitment that he made to obey Abraham's wishes. There was a covenant between them. So the story continues. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master, and he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor, and he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Please, or let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. So Abraham's servant travels to the region of Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor, who is Abraham's brother, and then when he gets there, he devises this test. Now, this is not a test of knowledge that you would have in school. Okay? This is not a math test. He does not devise this evil, wicked plot where he jumps out from behind the well and surprises a young lady and says to her, I have 10 camels. If you were to divide them into 3 even groups, what would that look like? And then see if she could figure out what 3.3 repeating would look like in groups of camels. If you don't get that joke, pull out your calculator and do the math, and you'll see that you can't have a fraction of camels. Unless you, well, never mind. No, this is a test of character, not a test of math, which I suppose some of you actually might prefer over a math test. Notice that in the instructions that Abraham gives his servant Abraham, the contingency is not on the lady's character. The contingency is on whether or not she is willing to come back to Canaan and leave her relatives. So the servant is willing to make his job harder for the sake of his master and future master to benefit Isaac, showing how he values Abraham and Isaac. Because this isn't actually a small test. Okay, the story continues. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her jar of water on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water to drink from your jar." She said, "Drink, my lord," and she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. Then when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking." So she quickly emptied the jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. So, as I alluded to before reading, though this test seems simple on its face, it was not a small task that Rebekah needed to undertake with just the prompting of a stranger asking for a drink of water. We miss this on first glance, perhaps, because, show of hands, how many of you have drawn water from an ancient Israeli well? Okay. And how many of you have watered camels? Okay. A couple people have watered camels. Good. Let's explore the requirements of this test a little bit. First, the well that Rebekah was drawing water from is not a well with a crank and a bucket, okay? Nor is it a well with a pump. The Mesopotamians, though they were advanced in some ways, had yet to invent electricity and the motor, okay? More than likely, this is either a hole in the ground that water comes out of, or more than likely this, a ramped well to account for water levels. Okay, so Rebekah would literally walk down the ramp to wherever the water level is, fill up her bucket, and then come back up the ramp, based on wherever the water levels were at that time. So Rebekah walked from where she lived to the well, with her bucket. Mind you, this bucket is not small. In theory, this bucket would hold enough water to last all day, at least until evening. So the women of the city would come out in the morning and fill up their buckets or jars and then bring them back. It would last all day, and then as it says in the text, they would come out in the evening after the heat of the day had passed and fill up their buckets again. More than likely, this would be a 5-gallon stone jar or clay jar. They didn't have plastic back then. I know, it's surprising. Just for the sake of reference, a 5-gallon bucket that we are familiar with, when full of water, weighs about 40 pounds. Okay? A clay or stone bucket, because clay or stone is heavier than plastic, would weigh more than the 40 pounds. Okay? The servant watches Rebekah come to the well, fill up her bucket, and then asks for a drink of water. She allows him to drink. And that's the only prompting that the servant gives her. Now, this strange man has just asked to drink directly from the water source in which you are going to bring back to your family. This would call into concern hygiene issues. So, the natural thing to do would be either to dump the water out and go refill your bucket, or, since there are camels that this stranger has, fill up the trough with the remaining water and then fill up your bucket and be on your way. Instead, Rebekah quickly goes and fills the bucket again to continue to water the camels. This leads us to the third item that we must examine in this test. That being that the servant designed. I'll get the word out. Designed. That being of the camels. So, the servant has 10 camels. The average one-humped camel weighs about 1,500 pounds, and when thirsty, can drink roughly 50 gallons of water. So, with her 5-gallon bucket, we're looking at 10 trips back and forth to the well for one camel. She is willingly and unprompted undertaking the task of watering 10 camels. This would be around 100 trips. This means that she is transporting somewhere around 2 tons of water. To give you an idea of the length of time it would take, I get 3 tons of wood pellets delivered to my house every fall to heat my house during the winter. Okay? Each bag weighs about 40 pounds. It takes me around 30 minutes to bring a half-ton of wood pellets to the basement from my garage. This involves me picking up the bag, walking down the stairs to the basement, then putting the bag down, then coming back up the stairs and grabbing another bag. Okay? Repeat until I get a half-ton done in about 30 minutes. I usually stop after that because I'm tired. Okay? Rebecca doesn't have the opportunity to stop. 1. 2, so just that by itself, okay, you would calculate that the process of watering 10 camels, moving 2 tons of water, would take about 2 hours. However, that's not calculating the fact that I am a 30-year-old man and she is a 12 to 15-year-old girl, and I am wearing polyester and shorts and she is wearing robes and sandals. So this could easily take 3 hours, and it's the evening, and she's been working all day. Meanwhile, the servant is standing there silently watching all of this take place. Why? Well, as the text says, he is waiting to see if the Lord has prospered his journey. Have you ever volunteered to do something and then realize halfway into it that it's more than you bargained for? Have you ever started a project at school or at work and you gave it your best effort for the first half of the project and not your best effort for the second half? Have you ever watched a football game where you noticed that the team just didn't show up in the second half? They gave a really good effort in the first half and then they could have just stayed in the locker room after that. Or have you just given up because it's too much work? Especially when it comes to manual labor, I know that I've done that sometimes. It's hot, I'm tired, I don't want to, what was I thinking? These are all reasons why Rebecca could have stopped working halfway through the process of watering the camels, especially since the stranger didn't even bother to help. Didn't even offer, just silently watched. Well, the camel test concludes. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels and said, "Please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." She added, "We have plenty of room, plenty of both straw and fodder, and room to spend the night." The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord, and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, whom you have not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness towards my master." So as soon as the camels stopped drinking, the servant immediately gave Rebekah the gifts customary to initiate bride price. He knew that Rebekah was the woman he was looking for, and so you notice the first thing that the servant does after Rebekah reveals her lineage is he thanks God for blessing his trip. An important lesson to learn. There are also some other important lessons we can learn from the story of Rebekah and the camels. First, it's important to remember that you never know who's watching you. Rebekah had no idea who the servant was, and the servant didn't know who she was. But Rebekah was ready to serve when she was prompted, and she served to the best of her ability. No matter how tired she was, or how hot she was, or how badly she wanted to quit, she finished what she started. Second, if you ask God to do something, give him time to do it. At any time, the servant could have been satisfied with the work Rebekah was doing or offered to help her, but he asked God to do something specific and had the self-control to wait on God to see if he had blessed his trip. And waiting on God to act is sometimes worse than actually doing the hard work, isn't it? But they're both important lessons to learn, and lessons we can learn from Rebekah and the camel. And we all have work to do in the kingdom of heaven, and we all have to wait on God in our lives sometimes for God to act on our behalf. So be prepared, because those opportunities, they don't always announce themselves with fanfare and neon lights. In fact, they rarely do. But these are hard things to do sometimes. And maybe you find yourself falling a little short in either watering your camels or waiting on God. Today is a great day to start over. The great thing about God's grace is it's always available for you to have a fresh start. And maybe today is the day for you. Jesus is ready. He's ready to help.